back to Minimal Expectations. We're indoors today because it is throwing it down outside. It is supposed to be August, but I suppose we're paying for the good weather that we had earlier on in the year. Today I'd like to talk about the top wagons that I've made for the tramway. I've got one here, and the idea is that you can build a simple chassis and then put a variety of different tops on it. So you'll have seen in the videos I've got flat tops that fit in like that. I've also got the steel tubs, and there's also the laundry baskets. I'd like to make two more of these chassis, so we're going to have a look at constructing two more from scratch and to show how simple and cheap it can be. But first of all, let's have a look at the two existing ones. So these are RHT numbers 6 and 7. Number 7 lives primarily in the shed with a lawnmower on top of it, and this one tends to live in the polytunnel with seedlings on top of it, and they get then used for whatever, whenever they're needed. So I bought the wheels first. The wheels on these are extremely large for 5-inch gauge. They were a project that somebody had decided not to do anymore. I found them on eBay. They were quite cheap. I can't quite remember how much they were. Anyway, standard pillow block bearing supports there, straight from eBay, 8 of those, and the bearings on the standard models are just held to the sole bars by M12, I think, or maybe they're M10 coach bolts that go through the chassis, and they're held on like that. This one I've put some, I've let a little bit of play, and I've actually put some springs in between the sole bar and the bearings to give it a bit of suspension, but I'll come back to why I'm not so bothered about suspension anymore in a second. The chassis itself has got two main sole bars, and these are actually not the way round that you'd expect them to be. They're laid down flat, and that's to get the width from the 5-inch gauge out to 12 inches to support the deck, the main area here, which is 2 feet by 1 foot, and that's scaled down from Sir Arthur Hayward's 6 feet by 3 feet for 15-inch gauge. And then there's a little sideways extension on the buffers which makes them slightly wider, and then there's a spacer at each end, and that slots into that the space between the two sole bars made by the spacer for the buffers. And that's about it, really. It is held together by these, you can see the M6 studding, that holds them in place, but if we look underneath you can see that there are additional braces, and these add to the rigidity of the thing. So, for making some more of these, the critical thing that we need to maintain is the height of the tops of the sole bars and the internal dimensions of the gap in the middle, because that's what the existing tops fit into, and if I build more of these they need to fit on with the existing tops. So let's have a little closer look about some of the things that I'm going to change for this next batch of wagons compared with this one. The original pair of wagons had these large pillow block bearings, and the wheels were about 5 inches in diameter. Now, it's actually quite difficult to find more wheels of that size with 5-inch gauge, but I managed to pick up some second-hand wheels from another model engineering club at 4 inches in diameter, and there are other manufacturers who make wheels of this sort of standard size, so this is a bit more realistic in terms of a design which can be replicated. So we've got these wheels now. I got 4 sets, so 8 wheels on 4 axles for £45 from a nice chap in Oxford. eBay again. Now these have a smaller diameter shaft or axle, so smaller pillow block bearings were available, and they're actually significantly smaller, so these will look quite different on the undercarriage. But again, this is just way overkill, and these were cheaper, so you know. I'm going to mount these on a rubber mounting block, which will take us up to about 10mm, and then I'm going to build make a 10mm spacer for wood, which will be bolted to the underside of the sole bars, which will bring us up to the same height overall. I experimented a bit with suspension. You can see there's some springs here, and actually I've come to the conclusion that in terms of derailment prevention, it would be very difficult to make a suspension system which can work with this unloaded. That's, you know, it weighs 15 kilograms. It's very difficult to make a suspension system that work both unloaded and loaded, considering that loaded, the max weight is, you know, one of me, which is an extra 70 kilograms. So I've sort of found that actually by improving the standard of the track work, these things don't derail anymore. So there really is no substitute for good track work in terms of sort of allowing, you know, you can do all the allowing the axles, all of that to move as much as you like, but actually there's no substitute for good track work in the first place. So these will just have stiff rubber blocks, and that'll do. The other thing I'm going to change is the design of the ends of the buffers. So originally, for ease, I made square ends, but I'm going to put this design on here with radiused ends, which is more similar to the depth of depot wagons that these are inspired by. So let's have a look at how to go about putting together one of the topped wagon chassis. I've got here a kit of parts for one chassis. There's not much to them really. This is all there is, apart from a few bits of simple metalwork, some threaded studding, and the buffer beam, the buffer cladding. So really you just need to use whatever good planed timber you can find. I didn't go to B&Q for this, I went to Ridgeons. They do a much more sturdy sort of timber. It's much denser, typically less warped and horrible. The two sole beams are 6.9 by 4.7 centimetres in cross section. Now this sounds like a bit of a funny measurement, but actually it's just that it used to be 3 by 2 inches, or the metric equivalent, and it's been planed all round, so it's had 5 millimeters taken off each side. That's why we end up with these ridiculous timber dimensions. In this country it seems that they start off with sort of imperial measurements and then take off 5 millimeters. So that's how we end up with 6.9 by 4.7 centimeters. I don't know what it's like in other countries. And we need 2 bits that are 74 centimeters long. There we are, cut off nice and square. We're also going to need 2 of these little spacers that form the sort of the buffer beams. These are the same material, and they need to be 16.7 centimetres wide. So the chassis goes together like this. So these spacers keep the sole bars the correct distance apart. The sole bars are extended through and become the buffer beams, just like the Dartford depot wagons. Now to get the ends spaced in correctly, we need to get hold of some little spacers which go in on either side like that, and then our buffer beams press up against them. So this is the other component that we need to manufacture, and they go in there like that. Now these are cut from a piece of 2 by 4.7 centimetre wood. Again, that's 2 by 1 inch planed all round, and we're going to cut them to 6.5 centimetres long. And if we do all that, we should end up with here to here being approximately 2 feet. So those go in there like that. So these will be screwed in place, and then we're going to put on a steel wrapper that will go round the buffer ends. The other critical dimension that you need to be aware of, because obviously if you're going to make these, you just use the timber that you've got available. The other thing that you need to be aware of is that the wheels sit inside between the two sole bars, so you can't bring them in close. That's one of the reasons why we need these. We need to extend the width of the buffers inwards, because for standard 5-inch gauge, buffer spacing is typically typically slightly narrower than the distance that we'd need between the sole bars. So yeah, you need to make sure that you've got room for your wheels to go in place. Yes, and also we need to make sure that these are close enough in that we can attach our bearing blocks to these. So those are the only things you really need to make sure. So we're going to first attach these onto here, bearing in mind that we're going to need to drill through to have a piece of studding which is going to hold the buffer cladding on. So 2 screws here and here, and then a drill all the way through, and then we're going to cut on this nice profile on the end, which I think will just add aesthetically, if not functionally, to the operation of the buffers. So we've marked these up for the midpoint. We're going to put in our 2 screw holes. We're going to use these screws, 4mm by 50. So we're going to drill holes here and here for that, and then we're going to drill a hole for the 6mm studding there. These holes are all shifted up to one end because we've got to remember I'm going to be taking off a big radius, big chunk there, so that's to allow me to be able to take round off that edge nicely. Right, holes drilled. Now we want the heads to sit flush so that the steel buffer protector can go over the top. So I'm just going to go in with a much bigger drill bit and countersink the holes just gently, not too far. And now we're going to line up these blocks with the far edge of the sole bars, with the holes skewed towards the middle of the sole bars, leaving, again, this edge is what we're going to round off. So we're going to line that up, and then I'm just going to use the drill to dot through the holes and mark the position for the pilot drill. And then with a very small drill bit we're going to drill the holes, the pilot holes for the screws where we've marked them. Having done that, we can now screw on the buffer extensions. Just going to put these partially in until they poke out the bottom a little bit. Well, that should align us nicely. Let's take a little while to get this nicely properly aligned, and then off we go. There we are. 1, 2. There we are. So, there we are. 1 buffer extension. Now, do be aware these components quickly become handed, so do make sure that you keep track of where all the components are going. I'm just marking out how we're going to alter the ends here, and on the inside edge we're going to put a 14mm circle, and that's going to be 14mm, the centre of it will be 14mm back from the front edge. On the outside edge we're going to draw a 22mm radius circle, and that's going to be 32mm back from the front edge. And then we're going to use a ruler to draw the tangent that connects both of these circles. With the tangent between the two drawn in, we can now look at the material that we need to remove, so it's this shaded area here. So we just need to mark that out on the other 3 ends, and then we're going to use our miter saw to cut this angle, and then make some 45-degree cuts, and then we're going to use a linisher just to smooth round and make it all nice. Now, these measurements were taken from, best guess, from the drawings of the Deptford Depot wagons that can be found in the Sand Hutton book. And in Blue Peter style, here's one I've made earlier. So this is the second chassis I'm working on. You can see I've come in and chopped away that line, and then we've got some 45-degree chops, and all we need to do is to come back in and now produce these radii like that. And I really think that the angles on the buffers does improve the overall look of these chassis. Using this drill mounted in a press stand, I've just drilled in each of the sole beams. I've drilled through the buffer ends all the way through, coming out here, and there'll be a piece of studding, 6mm studding, that goes through, and then this piece of studding will have nuts on the end that will secure the steel protectors that will wrap around the end of these buffers. So I've drilled a 6.5mm hole, and I'll have 6mm studding going through there, so we've got a bit of wiggle room. The next thing to do is to drill the 3 holes which will take the studding through the sole beams, and with which we will then clamp these together. Again, I'm going to drill 6.5mm holes for 6mm M6 studding. And it is on the end of these bits of studding that our classic diagonal square washers are going to go, that have become a bit of a feature of the things that I build. Now I've realised I've made a bit of a mistake, and of course, having put on the the rounded corners, I've now lost my reference surface for distances, for measuring distances along the frame. So I've just clamped up one of the frames with some sash clamps and made sure that it's sitting relatively square, and I'm going to mark off using these inside faces as my reference distance for where I want the threaded rod to end up. I've got my half leg calipers set to half the thickness of the frame, so I'm just going to put in some marks along here, which should give us where we want to drill the hole. So I'll repeat that for the inside edge, and then I'm going to measure in 3mm from here, and that's where our first hole will go. 3mm from here, and then I'll find the center point, and repeat that for all of the frame. For the tie bars, we're going to need 3 pieces of M6 studding cut to about 32 centimeters in length. So I've measured the first one off the wagon, and now I'm going to use that as my measurement for the other 2 main tie bars for this wagon. So I'm just going to use a marker to mark that one off. Find the mark, and I'm going to pop that in my bench vise here. Move the sole bars so that they're not in the way of the sawing, and then we're just going to saw down here. End like that. Move these back again now. Right, so of course we've got 2 sawn ends, which will be difficult to attach nuts to, so first thing we do before anything else is flatten off with a file. Ow. Then we're going to put a heavy chamfer all the way around. Taking care to not catch ourselves on the burr as I have done just then. The job's never finished until I have cut myself. And again for the other end. And pretty quickly we've got ourselves a simple wagon chassis, complete with the diagonal square washers. And you can see just how simple this construction really is. I haven't tightened it up yet. But yeah, it's got plenty of room for adjustment to get it nice and flat. So next step will be attaching the axle boxes, and drilling the pairs of holes required to hold the axle boxes, to take the bolts that hold the axle boxes to the underframe.